Welcome to Farming in the City. This is Urban Agriculture for a Sustainable Future. This was a presentation I did over the past weekend for our area's Growing Summit. We live in northern Indiana, and our property is a quarter acre in size. Our house was built in 1890, and our property also is, is part of what was called River Park. And River Park is no longer a city. It was incorporated into a bigger city. But back in the day, our property was actually the original part of when River Park was still a city. So we're pretty proud of the fact that we live in a home that's 126 years old now. We found some pretty unique things in our yard, some really old glass bottles, a 1929 chauffeur's license. I found a small ring that my wife wears. We just found some really unique things here. But besides that, we are also an urban farm. And so this is me just kind of going over where we are as of last year, and then I'm going to go into how we got there. So this is my presentation. So I hope you enjoy. It's exactly the same as what I presented. There are 2 extra slides, and I will point those out as we go along. So let's get started. So what does it mean to farm in the city? Well, according to the USDA, a garden produces food for private use, and a farm is any place from which $1,000 or more of agricultural products were produced and sold in a given year. Now, last year, when I started this, pretty much the first day I started selling at the Urban Garden Farmers Market, which is where we sell our produce, somebody came up to me and asked me what I did for a living. They thought, even though I was there selling produce, that's not what I did. And I said, I'm an urban farmer. And they proceeded to scold me and tell me that no, I was not, because this is my first time doing it. I had not made any money yet, so I could not call myself an urban farmer. Now, if I see them again this year, I can tell them that I am indeed an urban farmer because I made more than $1,000 last year selling our produce. It wasn't that hard, actually. It was pretty easy, in fact. Urban agriculture is really important to us because it increases the availability of locally grown food to the public, to our friends and our neighbors that are around us, and it gives them the ability to taste something different. And you'll hear me reference, I will say tomatoes because you're going to hear me reference it a lot. It's one of our favorite things to eat, so of course it's the thing we grow the most of. And we specifically grow a lot of heirloom varieties. And I tell people, when you go to the grocery store, no matter if you go to grocery store A, B, C, D, E, 4 or 5 different grocery stores that you go to, the tomato that you buy at one grocery store is exactly the same as the tomato that you buy at every other grocery store. And it's because those tomatoes have been grown specifically for grocery stores, so that when they arrive at the grocery store, they're perfect, they're round, they've got a nice firm flesh, they're red, they're just what consumers think of as the perfect tomato. And the problem with that is they're not ripe. They're shipped green, and when they get to their destination, or shortly before they hit their destination, they are blasted with this gas, this chemical that turns them red, and then they have no flavor. And so consumers aren't used to all these different varieties of tomatoes because they're not exposed to them. So we as urban farmers get to reintroduce that to our neighbors and our community and the people around us. And sometimes it's really hard because they're just not used to seeing what an heirloom tomato looks like, that it might look ugly, that it's not the perfect red, it could be different color, different sizes and shapes. But we still get to introduce that, and we've had a lot of success actually last year doing it. So why is farming in the city important? Before I get into what urban agriculture does, I'm going to explain this picture on the right here, and this is a 225 acre farm. You'll see this rectangle on the top, and then this kind of shoe-shaped object on the bottom, and that is all one property. At the very top, that rectangle, where the very top arrow was pointing, that was normally sweet corn that was planted there. On the very bottom, in that shoe-shaped area, was normally soybeans. 2/3 of that middle section was planted with green beans, and then the other third of that section was used as pasture for 8 dairy cows, and that middle section would be rotated every other year, it's for just pasture and for green beans. The dairy cows were mostly for family consumption, for friends' consumption. We didn't sell anything. This was my dad's farm. And I say was because my dad is no longer farming. He got out of it years ago. But I worked in this farm for 3 years. And this was this was 20 years ago, almost 21 years ago. And back then I wasn't, I didn't know almost 21 years ago that I would eventually become an urban farmer, and that food would become so important, and that I'd be so passionate about where our food came from. So to me, this was just kind of like a boyhood dream. It was just like, I get to be a little boy again. I get to drive big tractors around and play farmer. And I got to do it with my dad. It was really exciting for me, and I really loved doing it. But looking back on it now and knowing what I know now, I know that was a horrible way to farm, because we would go in those fields and we'd till up the land and we'd plant seeds, and then to make the seeds germinate faster and to grow faster, we would spray all these chemical fertilizers on it, and then the plant would get some kind of bug, and so we'd have to go out there and then spray a pesticide on it, and then we'd have a dry spell, so then you drag out these giant watering arches on wheels, and they'd go over the entire field, and then you hooked it up to your well, and that would spray the fields with water. And it was just this this giant waste of energy and resources, and there's nothing natural about it. We were just spraying chemicals and wasting water, and there's just lots of things wrong with it. And what's also sad is that we never ate anything off of this. I don't know who my dad sold these to, but this stuff was already sold when we planted it. And this was also true for another farmer that we helped, a good farming friend of my dad's named Greg. He had a field, 350 acre field, and it was all potatoes. The entire field was potatoes. And Greg never ate any of his potatoes either, because his field was actually owned by Lay's potato chips. So at the end of the season, we would go and harvest all of Greg's potatoes. They load up in these big giant trucks, and trucks would be full of potatoes. And sometimes the trucks would actually get so full as they're driving down, there'd be potatoes just like flying down the road. It was just kind of this common thing where we lived. And in the middle of town was this giant warehouse dump bin, and the trucks would just show up and they'd just dump all their potatoes in there. And this was owned by Lay's, and Lay's would come and Lay's would sort them, and then Lay's would take them off in another truck in specific potato sizes, and this was all for chips. So it was just this completely wrong way to farm, because my dad had 225 acres and grew 3 crops, and Greg had 350 acres and grew 1 crop. Looking back on that, I go, wow, that was just a completely wrong way to farm. So that's conventional farming. What we do is urban farming, and urban farming promotes soil building. So we're constantly adding to our soil and making our soil better. So down the list, you can see we do have minimal food waste via composting. So everything that we have that can compost, we put in our compost bin, and that compost bin goes back into our soil. So we're constantly building our soil. The only things that we don't compost would be meat and dairy, bread products, but vegetable scraps, eggshells, tea bags, coffee filters, all that stuff can be put in your compost to help build your soil as well. We use little to no municipal water, so we have 2 rain barrels. This year I'd like to add on a 3rd one in the backyard underneath of our garage. And we use those 90% of the time to water everything in our yard. Last year, I think I hooked up to a municipal water once, and that's because we had this really long dry spell. We didn't have any rain, and I needed to hook up to the sprinkler because everything was just looking really sad, even though I was trying to water it the best I could with the rain barrels. just so everything could get watered. But on average, we don't use municipal water. We just use what's in the rain barrels. We plant to promote biodiversity, so we plant lots of different flowers and flowering things, and we have a pond. Um, you know, planting lavender this year. I always plant marigolds. We plant borage, which is a great herb that brings in pollinators. But we plant these flowers so they bring in not only pollinators like bees, but butterflies. We have the pond that brings in frogs, which helps with insects. Brings in birds, which also help with insects. So we try to plant so that we bring in beneficial wildlife, so we're not just having like this dead zone of just us with plants and no wildlife. We want to support everything. We also use mulch to prevent erosion. So in the bottom of the screen with that shoe-shaped item, you can see a shoe-shaped field. You can see where it's just dead, compared to the greenery above it, and the fields kind of around there are just like dead ground, because it's constantly tilled with tractors and then just chemicals dumped on it. So it's just this dead soil, and part of the reason why there is so much erosion is because there's not only is it dead soil, but when the wind, you get this really high wind and it just like sweeps all this soil away. There's just millions and millions of pounds of topsoil that are lost every year on farms because there's no mulch to prevent that erosion. So you got rainwater that washes it off, and then you got wind that washes it off. What we use for mulch is a lot of times I put hay in the chicken coop. For the chickens to help them keep warm, and also for bedding. And then when they're done, I'll use it and I'll mulch around the plants with it. Also grass. So when I mow in the front yard where we still have grass, in the little area where Bijou plays, we also have grass, so I mow that. And I let it dry a little bit, and then I'll mulch with our dry grass as well. And then as the grass breaks down, it adds nitrogen to the soil. We use no pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. I will never have chemicals in my yard. There are plenty of ways that you can do things naturally. One of the easiest things that I know of that's super easy is it's called powdery mildew, and you'll see this on squash plants, and it looks like talcum powder on top of your squash plants. Now, if you take 2/3 water, 1/3 milk, whatever milk you want to use, it doesn't matter. Cow milk preferably, something about the enzymes in cow milk that help with this. But you put that in a bottle, shake it up, spray it on your powdery mildew, use it for a day or two, it'll get rid of it. And you won't have any more problems with it. And that's a natural way of combating a plant problem without using a chemical. There's plenty of ways to do this, but farmers are just, so used to just using a chemical to fix all their problems. We also decrease food miles. So from our urban farm to the urban garden farmers market where we sell our produce is 5.2 miles. So 5.2 miles from our home to the market where a consumer buys it and then takes it back to their home, which is either in our community or just outside of our community, is not many miles at all. Compared to if you go to one of our grocery stores right now and you bought a tomato, which is coming from Mexico, and the average miles from Mexico to our grocery store is 1,500 miles. I shouldn't even have to say how unsustainable it is for agriculture. We should be learning to eat what's in season, or what we have. We shouldn't want a tomato in northern Indiana where we get super cold for 4 or 5 months out of the year. It's not sustainable. We have minimal food waste by composting, which I talked about earlier. And we plant polycultures, not monocultures. So on my dad's farm, on Greg's farm, those are monocultures where you're planting one crop in a huge area. Polycultures are where you're planting lots of crops in that same area or smaller area. So we plant polycultures and not a monoculture. So the monoculture is the cultivation of a single crop in a given area, and scientists talk about the dangers in monocultures. So modern agriculture, the modern agriculture industry is trying to maximize how much produce they can get out of a single crop in a huge space. And this is by using homogeneous seeds or GMO seeds. A homogeneous seed is one gene. So the use of these seeds has some startling effects. So years ago, we as a worldwide community grew 7,000 species of plants that we ate. 7,000 food crops. But today, because of the invention of GMOs and how they're touted as being, quote unquote effective at giving farmers more bang for their buck, we only grow 103 crop plants and 7 livestock species that provide a majority of the food consumed by people in the world. So this is a really sad statistic. That means we grow less than 1% of the species of plants that we used to. And this is all because of GMOs, basically. So this is a trend that needs to stop and a trend that needs to be fought, and we need to get back to growing some more of those heirloom varieties and those old world variety of seeds. So why are monocultures bad? Well, in environments lacking biodiversity, like the ones caused by monocultures, pathogen spread, epidemics tend to be more severe. You get outbreaks of disease, there's invasions of insects. Climatic anomalies have caused crop and animal failures in the past because of monocultures. And the most widely known monoculture epidemic in history was the Irish potato famine. So back in the 1800s, the Irish planted what is known as lumper potatoes, and that's a specific variety of potatoes. And potatoes propagate vegetatively, so that means whatever potato that you grow, for us, for example, we grow red New Orleans is one of our favorite potatoes to grow. So when I take that red New Orleans out of the bag and I plant it in the ground, and it puts those shoots out, and then you get a tuber, which is a potato that you eat, and then it puts out more shoots and grows more tubers. Every single one of those is exactly the same as that original potato that I stuck in the ground. They're all clones, identical. So the lumper potato that the Irish grew was susceptible to a rot that turned the potatoes into inedible slime. And because Ireland was so dependent on those potatoes, 1 in 8 Irish people died of starvation in 3 years. And this was estimated at 1 million deaths. Now, had the Irish people just planted 3, 4, 5 more varieties of potatoes, this epidemic never would have happened, because this disease was only targeting this variety of potatoes. It was only targeting the lumper potatoes. So all they needed to do to get past this was just to plant a few more varieties. We're kind of seeing this today, not killing people, but the same thing with a specific variety. Bananas right now, the Cavendish banana, which is the banana that 95% of Americans eat, is having problems right now. There's a fungus that's attacking the Cavendish banana, and right now scientists are really worried because it's only affecting one area of the world where they're grown, but they're almost 100% certain that it's going to attack the other areas of the world where they're grown as well, and that this variety of banana is going to just become extinct. And they're also worried because consumers are used to paying, anywhere from 29 cents to 59 cents a pound for bananas that we're all used to eating. Well, what happens if we have to pay 99 cents a pound for bananas, or $1.49 a pound for bananas, or $2 a pound for bananas? Are you going to pay that for this banana? And the answer is probably not. And bananas are a commodity in the United States, in the world. So it's just one of those things where we're not prepared for the extinction of a certain kind of variety of bananas. And now they're scrambling to try to figure out what to do. Do they breed a new kind of banana? Do they try to get part of the Cavendish in with another kind of banana? It's just this really interesting repeat of history. Not to the point of people are going to die from it, but just to the point of a certain variety of a plant is being attacked by a certain disease. So really interesting, and I encourage everybody to look up the Cavendish banana and read about what's going on now, because it's very reminiscent of what happened back in the 1800s with the Irish and the lumper potatoes. So this is small-scale polyculture. This is our backyard, the smallest area in our backyard, and this is 570 square feet in total. And in that 570 square feet, we have asparagus, we have two varieties of bush beans, we have sweet corn, we have cucumbers, we have garlic, there's green bamboo, there's onions, there's three varieties of potatoes, radishes, three varieties of squash, six varieties of tomatoes, watermelon, two varieties of zucchini. So there's lots of things in that small area. As opposed to what I showed you on my dad's farm or what I talked about on Greg's farm. And then if a conventional farmer came in here and looked at this, he'd tell me that what I was doing here wouldn't work, and that if it did work, I'd get sad production, and that the plants would die, plants would get diseases. Just everything about it was wrong. And at the end of the season, I could tell him that no, in fact, he would be the one that was wrong, because I got great production. I had minimal problems. My biggest problem last year was I got tomato hornworms at the very end of the season, which wasn't really that big of a deal. I think I had about a dozen of them. But it was a problem I could take care of, and it was at the end of the season again. Like I said, I didn't really have many problems during the season. And on the other side of that, which is the largest part of our backyard, again, we have lots of things planted here. Bush beans, carrots, cucumbers, garlic, greens like mustard greens and collard greens, herbs. We had lots of thyme and sage, basil, onions, peas. I had hot and sweet peppers. There's pumpkins, radishes, strawberries back by the fence, summer and winter squash, lots of tomatoes, zucchini, our small orchard back there. We have a cherry tree. The big tree, which was here when we bought the house, was a mulberry tree. There's nectarine, two varieties of pear. There's peach and a plum tree. And in front of the fence, we have an apple tree. And I also have some apple seeds that I've started already that have grown pretty big, that will have more apple trees that we started from seeds. So I'm pretty excited about that, to see how those grow. But there's just so much diversity back here of fruits and vegetables. It's just, this is the way that we should be farming, not on like the monoculture side, the conventional farming side. Now, we have a lot growing on here, but most of this does not happen by me sticking the seed in the ground. Most of it happens with our greenhouse, and it's been our biggest investment to date. It's 10 feet wide, 20 feet long, 8 feet high. It's a really nice greenhouse. It gives us about a 6 to 8 week head start with our seeds. When these came out, the greenhouse was $700. I was lucky enough to get it at the end of the season on clearance, half off. It was $350. I really like this greenhouse. It does a lot for us. In fact, our first tomato came out of the greenhouse on June 23rd, and I harvested the last one on November 11th. So that's kind of unheard of in northern Indiana, to get a tomato in November. It was also our best-selling tomato. It was called Violet Jasper, or ZBU, the Chinese heirloom. It's also an extremely prolific grower, so I only planted 4 of these plants in the greenhouse. I didn't plant them anywhere else, just 4 of them in the greenhouse, just to see how they would do, because obviously the packager, you can see it says incredibly high yields, and I wish I had just weighed those tomatoes, because I got such a huge amount of yield off of those, just as the package says. But I didn't. I just, tomato per pound. Just, all tomatoes are lumped together. I am going to grow them again this year, though. They did great, so I want to grow them again. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we ended last year. But that's not how we started. This is how we started. This is December of 2013. We moved into our house in November of 2013. And when we looked at this property and I saw it, to me, I got really excited, because it was just this blank slate. And I was like, I know I could do something awesome with this. I know I could turn this into an urban farm. It's just going to take some time. It's going to take a lot of effort, and I can make it happen. So once a week, my brother would come around and help me build an urban farm, and I'm really grateful that he's been here and has helped me in creating my dream, and that he's taken part of it. But this is something that we do every year, and something we'll continue to do every year. This project is never going to be done, and I'm sure we'll move away one day, and if we do, I hope that the people that buy it will take over and keep doing what we do, because it really means a lot to us. So this is how we built our ongoing urban farm. It wasn't until March 30th that I started even contemplating doing anything. So here I'm digging up our first garden bed. And in 2014, I was working a full-time job, so I would do this either on my days off or before and or after work. So I don't remember the size of this bed. I'm sure it wasn't any more than 4 feet wide, but I don't know the length of it to be exact. I know I dug down about 12 inches. I put cardboard on the bottom of that, and that's cardboard from us just moving boxes. On top of that, I put sticks that you could see in the pile in the last picture. And on top of that, I put our compost, and on top of that, I put soil from what I dug out. And this is a reverse of a gardening technique called hugelkultur. So you take rotten logs and wood, and you kind of pile them up in like a triangle form, and then you put dirt on top of that, so you make this mound, and then you plant in that. And as the wood breaks down, it's adding all that nutrients to the soil and building the fertility. And then as it rains or you water, the logs retain that moisture, so you don't have to water as much. Well, I didn't want these mounds all over our yards, so I just did the opposite and dug a hole and put the logs in there, and then put compost on top, and chicken manure and kitchen scraps, and then the soil. And you know what, it did really well. We've got great production out of this bed. I installed our first rain barrel and pond for wildlife. So we have a 55-gallon rain barrel, and usually within 30 to 45 minutes, if we have a heavy rainfall, the rain barrel will be full. Very rarely is it empty, but when I first installed it, it did rain shortly after, and it was about 40 minutes and the whole thing was full. So it fills really quickly. And we have 2 of those now, and like I said, I want to hopefully add a third one. This is a 50-gallon pond. The pond attracts birds and frogs. In the spring I put fish in there, and then in the winter I'll take them out and bring them inside so they don't freeze to death. I don't have any pumps or any filters or anything in the pond, so if you come out some days and you'll see like all these mosquito larvae all over the pond, and within a couple hours the fish have eaten them all. So we don't really have a problem with mosquitoes in our yard. The rain barrels, I've found rain barrels on Craigslist almost all the time for like $8 to $10, and then the rain barrel kits, including the drill bits, everything you need minus the barrel, you can get at Walmart for $25. So for $33 you can make yourself, for $33 to $35 you can make yourself a rain barrel. So our first completed bed was on April 9th, and in a week and a half from when I started, we had our first garden bed, a rain barrel and pond, and our chicken coop with 6 chickens. And the 4 posts that you see there in the picture are the beginning of our dog fence and what would become the boundary to where we farm. If you want to know, we have 3 Rhode Island Reds and 3 Virginia Black Giant chickens. That is a coop you can buy at Tractor Supply Company for $200. I wouldn't recommend it unless you don't have any options. It'll last you 1 season with no work on it. If you want to add some things to it, it'll last you 2 seasons, but you're really pushing it at that. You should really just build your own chicken coop. That coop was $200. After that, we started on what would become our future orchard. So you can see my brother Matthew there, and he's digging out roots and pulling out roots. And then the picture to the right, not the dirt, but this big pile of vines and roots is from back there. Previous owners planted this ground cover of this vining plant, and it took us a long time to clear that out and get that ready so that we could actually plant our trees back there. And on May 4th, we finished cleaning up the orchard area, and I planted our first 2 fruit trees. In the picture is a 3-on-1 grafted cherry tree. Next to that on the left is a green gage plum tree, which is not in the picture, and we have yet to get a plum off of. Last year I got 1 cherry, literally 1 cherry off that tree, but it was really good. On May 8th, we finished the construction of the pellet wood fence, and when we completed this, I finally had that moment where I just was like, okay, great. Everything past the fence is my farming area. This is where I get to farm. Everything before it is where Bijou gets to play. And Bijou, before building this fence, had never been allowed to run around in the yard without a tie out. And this was at this house and the previous house that we rented and that we didn't own. And she loves running around outside, and I'm so happy to see her happy. After that, I wanted to create a natural compost system, and I wanted to create like a 3-compartment compost bin system. So I used all those sticks and wood that I had to try to do that. But as we collected more and more yard waste, I realized that 3-compartment system wouldn't work. So that 3-compartment system ended up turning into one giant compost pile, which is still fine. This area, that building over there is my neighbor's garage, so in between his property and our property, we can't do anything because there's a gas line. But I wanted to use it in some capacity. I couldn't plant trees, I couldn't stick anything in the ground, so an above ground compost pile works great for that area. So here we're slowly adding more and more planting spaces. You can see Matthew over there is he just tilled out that area and he's planting cucumbers, and in the area next to it I planted cucumbers, and we had this little kind of competition going on where he ended up growing more cucumbers than I did, and I don't know how because he was only there 1 day a week and obviously I was there every day. We picked our first radish or turnip, lettuce greens, and we got our first egg from our chickens in mid-June. We expanded our chicken coop. That chicken coop is great when you have small chicks, but as they grow and get bigger, they need another place to run around and forage. And so we built a run or slash tractor out of a PVC pipe and chicken netting. This cost me $75. If you look online and try to find a chicken run, you'll find one half this size and it'll be $200. This was a really easy way to build a much larger one for the chickens. And as I said, it gives them room to forage, and then I could also shut the door and I can move them around the yard. And I'd move them, they get up in the morning, they come up for their food, and I move them down a little bit, and they would forage in that area for a day. I'd move them back, and the next day I'd put them in the same space, and we do this for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and they would tear up that entire area to the point that I could just plant in it. And they'd already fertilized it with manure, they'd already dug everything up, they'd already eaten all the bad bugs. It's just this great symbiotic relationship that we have with our chickens. And from June 23rd, 2014, when we got our first egg, until December 31st, 2014, we collected 754 eggs from our 6 chickens. This was just 2 eggs shy of 63 dozen. So, you never have to buy eggs. So here's one of my added slides that I didn't put in the original presentation. This is our new chicken coop. This is the one that my brother and I built, and this is from pellet wood and from an old shipping container, both from the factory that my brother works at. The only thing that was purchased for this was we bought a few U nails and a few L brackets to hold things together. My parents bought us the chicken wire. Everything else was just from the pellet wood and the shipping container that he brought over. Even all the nails that we pulled out from when we took apart the other shipping container, we reused on this. So really trying to reuse lots of stuff and not buy anything new. But this is the new chicken coop, and it's about 3 times the size of the old ones, and the girls really seem to enjoy being in this. I kept the old chicken coop just in case there's a chicken that needs like a med bay isn't getting along with another chicken, got hurt. There's always something that can come up with chickens. So just in case, we've got the other one still. So we come to the 2014 harvest. And in 2014, I like to say that, I was a gardener. I wasn't a farmer yet. I was working full time, as I said before. Um, but this was still like a real passion for me. And so we grew 80 pounds of produce, which is still pretty good, and some butternut squash and cucumbers, tomatoes, and a couple kinds of carrots. Here you can see beans growing there up a trellis, and some cucumbers down here on the right hand side. So 80 pounds for two people is still a lot of good produce for two people. And of course, we shared that with my brother and his wife since he helped out. And October 15th, we built our greenhouse. And having a greenhouse was really important to us because we knew it would extend our growing system. And it also then and still is our main area for seed propagation. When we began to sell our produce at the Urban Garden Farmers Market last year, we really found out how important it was to have the greenhouse because we could grow plant starts extremely quickly for our customers. So when we started, we learned that customers really wanted us to provide them with plants so that they could start their garden. So I was able to do this within a couple weeks to get plants going really fast and really strong. And then when they didn't sell, I could bring them back and put them back in the greenhouse, and they were safe, and I could take them again the next week and the next week until people didn't want them anymore. And then I could just put them out in our yard, and then whatever produce came out of that, then I could sell at the market. So it was just this great relationship, even just with plant starts for us. And then it also allowed us to have vegetables much longer, such as the tomatoes that I talked about in the early slide. That otherwise would not have made it until November 11th, which was the last date we picked a tomato last year. And then 2015 season began, and here you can see us tearing up another large part of the yard, and this was going to be our potato bed. In front of that potato bed, you can see that was where the cucumber battle was, which we combined into one area, and then we just proceeded to dig what was past that to be our potato bed. And we planted Red Norland and Kennebec and Yukon Gold. Kennebec I would never plant again. Yukon Gold did pretty well, but the Red Norland did excellent for us. And actually today I went and picked up 20 pounds of Red Norland seeds, so that's all I'm going to be planting this year. I'm not doing any other potatoes. In the front yard, we built 2 raised beds, which later became 3. I have plans to build 5 more, and this was not only to provide more food, but it's also aesthetically appealing to our neighbors. The backyard I treat as a farm, so when I go back there, it's farmland to me. The neighbors don't want to see that in the front yard, though. We have a big privacy fence in the backyard. Nobody really sees it except us, or neighbors if they're up in their second story, whatever. So the front yard is always just to look nice, but still to grow food. So the raised bed is a great way to do that. So here you can see we're making even more planting areas. The picture on the left, the corner closest to you would be the original bed that I put sticks and compost down on, and then just expanded out on that. And then in the corner farthest from you was a keyhole garden bed that I attempted to build and make work, and it didn't work out so well for me. The picture on the right is back by the chickens, right in front of the orchard, and this was what would become our squash bed and pumpkin bed. So the idea of a keyhole garden bed is to have a lot more planting area in a much smaller space with a compost bin. As the compost goes in there, it breaks down and feeds that soil. My keyhole garden bed looks more like the Millennium Falcon than it does that picture up there. And we grew garlic really well this way, but I couldn't figure out how to make the sod stop growing grass. And normally this would not be made using sod. I just thought it was a great way to reuse something that we had taken from our property. So as the grass grew, I just kind of gave up on it and did other things. And it wasn't until later on that I found that we had 5 little baby bunnies growing in there. And as I planted things out in the yard that kept disappearing, things were getting eaten. Pretty much all of our peas were decimated. And I just could not figure out what it was. And it was these 5 little rabbits. And at first I was kind of angry, but I let it go. That's what they're supposed to do. I let them grow up and disappear. And when they were finally all gone, I tore down the bed and just kind of gave up on that idea. So here you can kind of see our greenhouse progression. So I'm the one that uses a greenhouse pretty much on a daily basis, and using it every single day, I've kind of realized how I need to utilize it better because I've got limited space. So on the left is how it started, and you can see it's nice and spaced out, and I just had shelves on the left and the right, and this is where I put all my plant starts. And then on the right you can see I kind of moved those over to the left and the middle, and then on the right I started planting in the greenhouse, and at the very end there you can see the 4 violet jasper tomatoes that I planted. There's also grow bags in there and some fruit trees and pots that I was trying to bring back to life. At the end of last year, this is kind of how the greenhouse looked. You can see there's plant starts everywhere. I even brought in another table to put plant starts in. The grow bag had peppers in it. There's a zucchini growing underneath of the potting bench. I've got greens growing underneath of a bunch of the shelving systems. There's just all kinds of stuff going on here, and it's because I wanted to get the most use out of my space. I know some people have said, well, you could have used, inside of your walking area and just, let it all take over. And it's like, you gotta have some kind of working area. So I think this is probably about the best use I could have got out of that space last year. And you can see on that picture on the right how big those tomato plants got, and they still grew even more than that by the end of the season. So here's our front yard raised beds when they're all full of produce. Each one is 18 square feet to work with. In the back are pea plants, and it's a tomato cage in each one of those. There's 3 tomato cages at the end. That's where the peas grew. I didn't want, if the sun came down, I didn't want that to block out what was in front of it, so they're at the very back. We've also got carrots, spinach, and chard, kale, broccoli rabe, onions, lettuce, radishes, and kohlrabi specifically for its greens for a mix that we sell. Also, you can see in our front yard rain barrel, and along the sidewalk, I planted even more. So there's sage, onions, potatoes, peppers, tomatoes. Those were all planted along the sidewalk. When we moved in, the entire sidewalk was lined with hostas, and I'm not a real big fan of hostas. They're invasive and they don't do anything, they don't provide anything, but our neighbor likes hostas, so every year I keep digging out the hostas and giving it to our neighbor, and he takes them and enjoys them, and in place of them I put edibles. So potatoes, which still put out lots of pretty flowers that people like, and tomatoes that put out flowers, peppers put out flowers, so it's still beneficial to everybody. It still looks nice. So our 2015 harvest, which looks a lot different than our 2014. We have many more varieties of tomatoes. There's beans, many more varieties of squash, lots more varieties of peppers, onions, and cucumbers, more beans. Lots of different things that we grew on this property. And in 2014, we grew 80 pounds. In 2015, I like to say I'm finally an urban farmer because I grew 6 times more than 6 times what I grew in 2014. I was quite proud to grow 528 pounds of produce, and a lot of that went to our neighborhood and our community at our market. And I'd like to say that we probably grew more than 528 pounds because there was 2 or 3 plants out there, 2 or 3 tomato plants specifically, that never made it in the house or to market because everybody would go out there and as they're walking around and working and doing things, they would just like pluck tomatoes off of and eat them. And there was no designation. It was just like somehow like these tomato plants became like this is what we get to eat when we're outside. But still officially documented, we are at 528 pounds last year as opposed to 80 pounds in 2014. Just kind of overwhelming to me because when we hit 300 pounds I was overwhelmed, and I never thought we'd hit 400, and then we hit 500, and then we went beyond, and it's kind of crazy. I never thought I'd get to this point. And this year I'm shooting for 1,000 pounds. I really hope we get there. If we don't, that'll be okay. But I'm sure going to do my best to get there. And the key for us to growing all this food in such a small amount of space is square foot gardening. And this was invented by Mel Bartholomew in 1981. And it places plants much closer together than conventional farming. And Mel's been criticized by a lot of people for his technique, but it really does work. I mean, I like to say I'm proof positive that things work. We've grown tons of produce and tons of food in a small area using Mel's method. We'll keep using Mel's method to grow more produce in more smaller spaces, and I keep learning too, and I keep using different techniques. There's another technique called biointensive gardening, which packs things in even closer than the Mel's method, and I use that for a few other things. I also interplant crops. So I place carrots below tomatoes. There's a great book that's called Carrots Love Tomatoes. I also place beans around fruit trees and corn. Everybody's heard of the Three Sisters, so you plant beans, corns, and squash. Trees also need nitrogen for the greens in the tree. So if you place beans around the tree, the beans get to trellis up the tree, and they'll fix nitrogen in the soil, which is very beneficial to your tree. And then I place radishes between larger plants, so between like eggplants or tomatoes, peppers, I'll plant some radishes in there. Really trying to utilize as much space as I can, but this is also something that's taught largely by permaculture. You know, stack plants by height, as you would see in nature. So you plant like a radish below, tomato on top. It goes a lot further than that, but you want like beneficial plants together, and a canopy and a lower canopy, and like there's so much more to this. But just trying to utilize your space the best that you can, and don't just think like you plant a tomato in a square foot and you're done with it. It's like, no, you still got stuff underneath of it, like carrots that you can plant there that don't need a lot of sunlight, that'll do okay underneath of something. So my farming advice would be to just start. You know, I talked about it for years. I probably drove my wife nuts saying I wanted to do this. Eventually, you just have to dive in and find out if you want to do it. You know, I always thought I wanted to because of working with my dad, and I really enjoyed that. It wasn't until I actually started doing that that I realized that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I love doing this. It's a lot of fun to me. So just jump in and do it. Just try it. You know, even if you try it for half a season, you try it for a month or two. You know, you'll figure out if you want to do it or not. Also read a lot. There's tons of great books out there. Now, I like to read, but I also like to watch things much more. So YouTube is also your friend. There's a wealth of information for farmers all over. In my opinion, I think it's much easier to learn visually than it is to read, especially in gardening / farming. So YouTube has been really beneficial for me over the past 10 years. I've really learned a lot on there. And on the flip side, never take anything at face value. What works for one person might not work for you, so always try it first. You know, there's tons of ideas and techniques, and you'll read or you'll see somebody that says, you know, this is the number one way to grow X thing, and then you try and it doesn't work. Well, it's all dependent on how much sun, what kind of soil, climate. I mean, it depends on a million different things, so always try something, and you'll find what works for you in your area. Also, don't worry about what other people think, especially your neighbors. You know, we often thought in the last house we lived, which was a rental from our friends, but we had a pretty big garden over there. Our neighbors used to stare at us, and we thought they didn't like what we were doing. It wasn't until months later that we found out that they really loved what we were doing, and they were just staring at us because they wanted to watch us and see what we were doing. Don't go broke either. Just work your way into it. There's plenty of ways to farm on the cheap. I always say one of the easiest ways is to pick up old tires and fill them with dirt, stick them in your yard. That's a perfect raised bed. And we always find tires in our alley. The people are always throwing those away. Don't go broke either. Just work your way into it. I think I already went over that, didn't I? Repeating myself now. Most importantly, just have fun. This is what I do for a living now. I left my job in April of 2015 so that I could do this full time. If it ever felt like a job, I would quit doing it. This is something I love doing every day, and there's days that I come in that I'm really sore and I'm tired, but I keep doing it day after day after day. It's become something that's part of who I am, and I really enjoy growing food. I really enjoy being outside. I really enjoy working with the land. Um, so it's fun for me. It really is. So, that's why I say most importantly, just have fun doing it. So my book movie recommendations was, of course, be the all new Square Foot Gardening by Mel Bartholomew. Also, Mini Farming Self-Sufficiency on a Quarter Acre by Brett Markham. Brett has multiple quarter acre farming books, and they're all really worth reading. If you have less than a quarter acre, more than a quarter acre, they really show you how to utilize your land and ways that you can get more production out of the space that you have. Movie recommendations, these are all documentaries. Farmageddon, Food Inc., Food Matters, Food Stamped, King Corn, Monsanto Patent for a Pig, World According to Monsanto, and Urban Permaculture with Jeff Lawton. All really great documentaries. I highly recommend you try to find all of them. The Monsanto ones might be a little hard to find, but they're all available if you look hard enough for them. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to watch this. We're South Bend Homestead, and you can find us online at southbendhomestead.com. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Pinterest, Google+. We're all over the social networks. So I just wanted to say thank you for watching. I have one extra slide, and this is the 2016 greenhouse. And this is my setup this year. So this year I purchased 2 mini greenhouses, and these are the shelves that you see on the right and left hand side, right in the front of the greenhouse. One of these I used to start plants in downstairs, and those are the plants that you can also see there on the left hand side in the picture. I also bought cinder blocks and closet shelves and made more shelving. And so by having all of this extra shelving, I've been able to get 70 seed starting trays in the large greenhouse. So this is still just showing how progressing from 2014 to 2015 to 2016, how I'm still trying to learn how I can utilize my greenhouse. This is something that I'm sure still over the course of this year and next year, I'm still going to be trying to find ways that I can add more and more to this greenhouse, because there's this height difference. I feel like there's still so much room in there that I can use, but it's all height. So I need to find ways that I can build up or get more shelves that are up higher. But having 70 seed starting trays not only is enough that I can get our stuff started so that we can plant stuff to grow to sell, I'll also have enough room now that I can have plant starts for my customers at market to sell them plant starts. So it's still really just me learning how to utilize my space, and getting 70 seed starting trays in here is probably double of what I got in there last year, if not more than double. So once again, I'd just like to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a great 2016 growing season. And I'm sure you'll see more of me on this channel in the coming months.